The cacophony of screams outside the walls merged with the lashing of magical energies from the titanic confrontation, and it struck the stronghold hard. Walls buckled, flagstones shifted, ceilings and floors cracking and threatening to give, but they held strong. Within the stone shell, anything unsecured was shook from its place as the very land heaved under the waves of force traversing through it. In the depths of the fortifications, the populace of the town had sought refuge from the devastation being wrought beyond. For the most part, it seemed as though this was a far better plan than attempting to survive outside amongst the maelstrom that raged, as the forces deciding their fates slammed against each other over and over, each impact searing the air and tearing the very fabric of the realm. Among those sheltering were many in need, but there were some still missing, their numbers within being too frightened of what lay beyond the walls to attempt to rescue more of their own. Prayers could be heard all around, of salvation, of hope, of desperation, of an end to this madness. Outside the walls, the scene was that of a rapidly growing quarry, as buildings were dashed into their individual parts, brick and stone scattering as waves of energy tore them apart, along with anything still standing. Trees, deer, horses, even the anvil of the forge was tossed freely into the air as though paper. Nothing living could be there and survive. Of that, all could be certain. And yet, somehow, there were still a few holding on dutifully, against these odds. Shielded by a rocky outcrop that had weathered many a storm in its day, and thereby sheltered from a good portion of the raging energies, lay the heavily damaged remnants of a temple of Siduni. Within those walls, the remaining living of the area were gathered, performing their duties and focusing their attention upon the one who lay upon a cold stone tablet of Derathon, a woman in great pain. All who gathered here were members of the temple, choosing to protect the sanctity of life where possible, and to aid those in need. And who could be more in need than a woman on the brink of birth? She gasped for air before breathing out long and hard, her face contorting as her body tensed and twisted. She knew of what was transpiring outside, and understood its outcome, as she had been forewarned of this dozens of moons or more past. She also knew that she must complete what she had started, the birth of her son, now, amidst this madness, that a hope could rise from this moment for all to come after. She looked into the eyes of the one who watched over her, who had watched her since she had been gifted her task, and nodded to them before bracing herself once more. She cursed in her head as she saw fleeting images of the past and of the delivered portent. Malerna, damn your plans! Only to be snapped back to the present with words not hers. You must push harder, a calming voice insisted, a hand mopping her sodden brow with the torrents of sweat descending. I am pushing harder, came the response as the woman grasped the table edge and tried to force the child from her with yet more cries of pain, protestations almost lost in the vastness of the noise washing over them from the clashing forces outside. Two priestesses looked on as their leader channeled her remaining power, such as it now was, into her ward, all the while calm of composure as she uttered the words of encouragement. You are doing well. Almost there. Slowly. Slowly. Yes, there. I can see the head. Now push! The woman grimaced at the priestess and took one final deep breath, her lungs filling to bursting, ready for the final push. It would, however, be her last breath of life, albeit her most important. Something occurred outside beyond their vision and reckoning, and it seemed to become silent for a few seconds. The reality was the culmination of another's master plan to save this prime, but the aftermath of such was never truly considered, at least not by the ones who had instigated it. All was suddenly calm, and the falling debris of the town could be heard for a few seconds before it hit. The priestesses glanced to each other and sighed in relief. It was over. This was a falsehood, and one they soon discovered. There was a sudden explosion of raw energies, the release of all the powers of the clashing ones all at once. The sheer mind-melting awe of what was transpiring would be lost on those within the temple, for as it occurred, the last thing they would ever hear was that silence, pierced by a newborn's cry, and then they knew no more. The temple was hit by the pulsing waves of power as they dispersed from the place where the plan's last stand had been, scant acres from where they stood. The temple was rent apart by the first wave, and the wards that protected those within melted away under the magic that bombarded them. They were made to withstand the elements, war, and such damage, and even demonic assaults, but this was a level beyond their means. Next, as the energies pulsed and flowed across the land, those within the temple too melted much as their wards had, their skin and then flesh joining the liquefying stone they had once stood upon. All of this in the time it took to hear the first utterance of the child as it breached and was delivered onto the now warm and waiting stone table. The child lay seemingly untouched by the assault upon all around him, and although newly born to the realm, could see imagery that none could. The child fell silent as it stared into the lights it beheld, seeming to understand that the energies around them did not mean them ill. Instead, they were gifting them with knowledge and power, tempering their form, bolstering and encasing. They were protecting this new life, one that would be born in place of all those lost that day. The priestess saw the child as it appeared and smiled inwardly in the knowing that what was taking place was as intended. And despite her failing form, she stared at them until her body failed, her eyes dissolving. She had done as she had promised. Her last thoughts before becoming one with her church were those of a fulfilled purpose and joy. Today they would, with their dying light, give this prime hope for future times. They would give it this child. The vast energies that flowed across and through the temple continued turning all to liquid as the magic tore apart their physical nature, leaving naught but a swamp of congealing ooze behind. Flesh, bone, glass and stone, now as one. However, the blackened stone table the child had been born upon lay unscathed, as had the child. Their mother, however, was gone before he could even know her, one with the priestesses that had stood alongside, all now as one. The child lay content as the energies subsided, but was alone save for the voices and visions in their mind's eye. As the landquake subsided, those who had sought refuge within the stronghold ventured out, surveying the destruction and mourning the loss of those who had not followed their lead. Surely nothing could have survived this devastation. Eventually, their gaze came to rest upon the once craggy outcrop where their temple had sat, now glass-smooth as it rapidly cooled. All they could see was a lake of hardening stone with intricate trails among the swirls of stone and mortar. Horror soon settled as they realized these patterns were in fact the remnants of the priestesses and others who had sought shelter within. Their still sombre bodies sprung to life as a single cry was heard across the setting silence, that of a child. They ran haphazardly towards it, several losing footing on the slick and not quite hardened surface, one falling as they discovered some of the ground was in fact very soft, sinking in and losing their foot to the heat and shifting stone as it seared and then sheared it off. Some broke off to help their fallen friend, the rest chasing to the source of the cries, and there they were, lying on the warm stone, untouched, unharmed. A man stepped forward and lifted the child, and the child gurgled approvingly as he was held aloft and carried to the stronghold where it would be seen to be a safer place for a newborn. The child was heralded as a sign from the gods, a portent of change in the times. Things would only get better from this point on, they were sure of it, and this child was somehow proof of it. As they moved away, quickly vacating the Derathon altar and exiting the remains of the temple, a sole figure emerged from the ruins, taking a seat upon the altar. They trailed their fingers across the still molten surface where once a mother had been and closed their eyes as she spoke softly. "You have performed amicably. and none could ever thank you for your sacrifice more than I." They moved across the now open main hall and caressed a few more molten patterns. "You two gave all that you could, and Siduni will thank you in time," they whispered. Then, standing to their full height, they turned and addressed the child who was rapidly vanishing from view, as though he could hear them. "And one day we shall meet, little one, and it will be in victory." And this would be the origin of the one who would become feared by all, including his own brethren, on all sides of the scales, both figuratively and literally. He would become a champion, a leader, a tyrant, and a killer. But most important of all, he would become one of the chosen to stand against the coming destruction. Or so it was believed, despite fate having other plans.